What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, September 27th, 2017, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauha on a Friday. And hopefully what will be a quiet weekend. We sure could use one around here, but it just seems like the further along we go, the more insane the world is becoming in general. Can't even point your finger at it and say, this is what's going crazy, that's what's going crazy. It's all going crazy. It's very frustrating to watch it all happen. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So let's get right to it. Remember last Friday, the Associated Press reported that the Department of Homeland Security had notified 21 states that their election systems had been targeted by malicious cyber actors. And the states and the corporate media quickly jumped to the conclusion that this was Russia. We finally had the proof that Russia was meddling with the election, even though the Department of Homeland Security said they didn't know who had been doing the hacking. Said the identities of the perpetrators were inconclusive. And we know how hard it is to frame somebody. The CIA's got a unit that frames other nations for false flag cyber attacks. And so apparently today, the Department of Homeland Security has started notifying some of these states like Wisconsin and saying, in point of fact, Russia had nothing to do with it. So the 2016 election was hacked just from much closer to home. And it's rather interesting that the corporate media is still going on and on about Russian hacking, and they're not commenting about all those people in Massachusetts who drove across the border into New Hampshire, took advantage of the same-day registration, registered, voted for Hillary Clinton, and skedaddled back to Massachusetts. And they had lied when they said they had moved into the state of New Hampshire because none of them applied for a New Hampshire state driver's license. And then we have all the illegals who've been caught voting, all the dead people caught voting, ballots that disappeared, machines that malfunctioned. There's a massive election problem in this country, and it's got nothing to do with Russia, but that's the narrative. It's all Russia's fault. We have an honest, wonderful election system. And it was so weird because middle of last year, Obama was out there. So when Trump first said, I'm concerned about hacking on the election, and Obama came on out and said, it's impossible to hack American elections. And then, of course, as soon as Hillary Clinton lost, she said, oh, the election had to be hacked. Jill Stein said the election had to be hacked. We need an investigation. And then when they actually started investigating, we got the head of the ACLU, the NAACP coming on and saying, no, don't investigate the elections. It'll be racist to investigate the elections. Now, Robert Mueller is in a bit of a corner. He was brought in to be the hatchet man on Donald Trump and his people trying to find some connection to Russia, ignoring Hillary Clinton's Uranium One deal and all the millions of dollars of Russian money that flowed into the Clinton Foundation. Mueller's job is to get Trump. We've got to get Trump. And he's getting desperate. He can't find anything. And the more he and his staff are investigating, the more is coming out about the illegal spying by the Obama administration, presumably for the benefit of Hillary Clinton. And it really is past the time for this man to be let go. And I noticed even Fox News was saying it's really time for Trump to fire this guy. Roger Stone is out there saying that Robert Mueller is going to try and manufacture a crime against Paul Manafort. They're just going to come up with something, anything, that they can go after him with and splash all over the media. See, there was collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, which is hypocritical when you consider just how much the United States has interfered with elections in other countries. And they're making a big deal over Russia interfering with our internal politics, even though they can't find much in the way of evidence of it. And yet Israel is just openly interfering with our internal affairs and internal politics, and everybody seems to think that's just fine. Little bit of a hypocrisy, double standard going on there. Now, the House Judiciary Committee has renewed their calls for a second special counsel, saying that there are unaddressed matters that are outside the scope of special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. And what they're talking about are, of course, indications that Loretta Lynch and James Comey were working to protect Hillary Clinton, especially the recent allegations that former FBI Director James Comey had literally written a letter ending the investigation into Hillary Clinton before interviewing 17 key witnesses as well as Hillary Clinton herself. This does need to be looked at. Remember when Comey got up there on TV and he went down the laundry list of Title 18 felony violations committed by Hillary Clinton, and then he said, no reasonable person would prosecute because she didn't mean to do wrong, except that if you've actually read Title 18, intent is not required. Negligence and carelessness in exposing classified information to potential enemies is a Title 18 violation, and it carries fines and prison time. And it's not the job of the FBI to recommend charges be filed or not. That's the job of the Attorney General. So that does need to be looked into. And it is rather amazing to see the swamp, the deep state, struggling so hard to protect Hillary and James Comey and Loretta Lynch and the rest of the narcocracy while seeking their little terrier, Mueller, on Donald Trump's ankle. Now, we're going to do a little shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And as you know, California Representative Dana Rohrabacher went over to Great Britain, to the Ecuadorian embassy, and he met with Julian Assange, who showed him information proving that the DNC emails were leaked, not hacked, and Russia had nothing to do with it. And Dana Rohrabacher's been trying to get to Donald Trump to present this information to him and talk about a possible deal for a pardon for Julian Assange. And we're hearing that White House Chief of Staff Kelly is blocking Representative Dana Rohrabacher. This is a member of the House of Representatives on official business. And apparently Trump is surrounded by people who are carefully filtering what he sees, because last Sunday, reporters actually asked Trump about what was going on with Julian Assange and this evidence, exculpatory evidence that shows Russia didn't hack the DNC emails, and Trump basically came off like he'd never heard of any of this stuff. So Trump is literally cocooned within the White House. He's being controlled by his advisors, all those generals, and they're just giving him this false reality, this matrix, this red pill of the world, or the blue pill, rather. And Trump is making decisions based on this illusion crafted for him, not on what is really going on in the world, and that is an incredibly dangerous situation. Trump needs to develop some outside information sources. Now, you're probably familiar with the legend of King Arthur and Merlin the Magician. And even though Arthur and the historical basis for Merlin lived in tremendously different times, over time in the legends retelling, they sort of got merged together. We saw the same thing with Robin Hood and Maid Marian and all the rest of that. They evolve over time. But there's an interesting metaphor about power politics in the legend of King Arthur. Because King Arthur, like Donald Trump, was surrounded by his knights who had a very strong vision of what the world should be. But King Arthur had Merlin, and Merlin's value was that he could operate at any level of society. He was perfectly comfortable and welcome within the court itself, but he could walk out of the castle, and he could talk to the merchants and the farmers and find out what was really going on in the country and bring it back to King Arthur. And right now, Donald Trump needs a Merlin, because it's clear he has been cut off from the real world by those who are using him to further their own agenda. Speaking of agendas, somebody got hold of the 2014 Clinton Foundation tax return. They took in $177 million in donations. They donated $5 million to charity. They spent $86 million donating that $5 million to charity and kept the $86 million change. But it's a nonprofit, so they're not paying taxes on it. Now, right there, these numbers tell you the Clinton Foundation does not qualify as a 501c3 tax-exempt foundation because all such organizations have to spend 51% of all donations have to go to the charity or purpose for which the foundation was created. And it wasn't all that long ago that we were hearing that the IRS was looking into this and possibly revoking the tax-exempt status of the Clinton Foundation. And clearly, based on these numbers, they should. And were they to do so, Bill and Hillary Clinton would become personally liable for all the taxes on all that money. But again, nothing is being done. The Clintons are untouchable. They're the heart of the narcocracy. They know where all the dead bodies are buried and how they got to be dead bodies. They're privy to the deep, dark secrets that could bring the entire government crashing down. Now, getting on over to the war zones, a Syrian Kurdish commander following the Kurdish independence referendum vote says the United States should stay in Syria during the post-Islamic State process, and they're ready to engage with Damascus. Damascus, surprisingly, came on back and said as soon as all of these terrorist groups are out of Syria and the U.S., Damascus is willing to talk about internal autonomy for the Syrian Kurds, which would put them on a par with the Iraqi Kurds who have an autonomous state. So Syria's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Walid Malam just pulled the rug out from underneath Israel and the U.S. agenda in Kurdistan. Because I think the Syrian Kurds are going to accept autonomy within Syria as opposed to trying to be completely independent and losing that war, which they're likely to do, even with U.S. and Israeli support. Now, over in Russia, their foreign ministry has issued a statement saying they support Iraqi territorial integrity amid the Kurdish vote. And it's interesting to see the United States out there saying, oh yeah, let the Kurds be independent. They have a right to be independent, because certainly the United States attitude was exactly the opposite when Crimea held an independence referendum and voted to split with Ukraine. And then it was the United States saying, we have to preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And we refuse to recognize the independence referendum in Crimea. Therefore, by default, Russia has stolen the country. It's kind of a weird situation. And again, it's another classic case. There's no consistent foreign policy. They're just saying whatever they want to say to deal with the immediate situation. And for those Americans who are following along and paying attention, you can see how the foreign policy is flipping back and forth. There's no consistent thread to any of it. It's simply whatever gets the U.S. what they want, which is more land and more of other people's money. Now, Iraq has deployed troops in Kirkuk, and part of the reason is that Kirkuk is being claimed by the Kurdish secessionists, even though it is not part of the currently existing autonomous Kurdish region in Iraq. So if there's going to be a civil war over this, it's probably going to start there. It's probably going to kick off there. Now, Erdogan is looking at Israel's support for the formation of a Kurdish state, which will involve chopping off a little bit of Turkey, and Erdogan is not happy about that. And so he's threatening to halt steps being taken toward normalization of political relations with Israel if it does not end its support for an independent Kurdish state. Frankly, I don't think Israel will really care. But Netanyahu is the only leader in the region to support this referendum. Now, over in Iran, Secretary of the Expediency Council, Mohsen Razai, blasted the referendum in Iraq's Kurdistan region, saying this is all for Israel's benefit. They want to create a second Jewish state in the Middle East. And a lot of people have already spotted that during the rallies for the independence referendum. A lot of Israeli flags. Israel's already committed to send 200,000 Israelis of Kurdish descent into the region. And Iraq doesn't want a second Israel. They have their hands full dealing with the one they've already got. Same thing with Turkey. Same thing with all the other countries in the region. They think it's a bad idea. And as one of the callers into the show indicated, this could be very obviously a stepping stone toward the Eretz Israel plan from the Nile to the Euphrates, because the Bible promised it to us. Actually, the Bible promised it to the Hebrews, not the descendants of the Khazars. Small, little technicality there we should all keep in mind. Now, Israel is cheering on the Kurds. Yes, they've got autonomy. They're going for self-determination, and that's a good thing. And again, hypocrisy, double standard. The Palestinians want self-determination and autonomy and independence. And Israel's not going to give that to them. It's another case of an inconsistent foreign policy betraying the hidden agendas. Here in the United States, Trent Franks, who's a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, introduced a resolution on Monday to convey Congress support for the Kurdistan region's independence. Now, it's just a symbolic gesture, but it is telegraphing that if it does come to conflict, the U.S. is probably going to go on in there. Any reason to get back into Syria and Iraq? Because even though the United States is clearly losing in Syria, they haven't given up. They still want Assad out. And maybe they know they can't win in Syria, just like they can't win in Afghanistan. The goal now is to not appear to have lost by just prolonging it as long as possible, no matter how much of other people's money it costs and how many of other people's children have to die for it. Now, turning over to Iran, the U.S. Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Joe Dunford, offered an unusually stern rebuke of the push to withdraw from the P5+1 deal with Iran. Testifying to the Senate Armed Services Committee, he confirmed the same thing Aiea is saying: Iran is fully in compliance with the terms of the deal. It is the United States that has reneged on the deal, because the deal was Iran would stop all work on nuclear weapons, they would ship their enriched uranium to Russia, and in exchange the U.S. would lift all the sanctions. And not only did the U.S. not lift all the sanctions, they've added more sanctions on top of it. Another reminder that you can't take the word of the U.S. government at face value, which is something that Kim Jong-un over in North Korea is definitely taking to heart. Now, all is not bleak for Iran. Apparently, the head of France's Union of Rubber and Plastics is showing interest in training Iranian industrialists to make car parts for cars that will be assembled in France. And meanwhile, Iran just took delivery of 2 Franco-Italian ATR-72 passenger aircraft. So it's looking like more and more nations are just flat out ignoring these U.S. sanctions. They're just going around, they're saying, really, this has caused so much economic harm. The U.S. seems to be sanctioning everybody these days. They've sanctioned Russia, they're sanctioning Venezuela, they're sanctioning North Korea, they're sanctioning Iran, they're sanctioning... And after a while, it gets tiresome. It gets very tiresome. Now, another example of how the U.S. isn't keeping their word. There's another treaty. And it was basically this convention for prohibition of chemical weapons, by which Russia and the United States agreed to destroy all their chemical weapons. And the U.S. agreed to destroy them all by April 29th, 2012. Russia just destroyed the last of their chemical weapons. The U.S. still has not. They've destroyed some of them, but not all of them. Quite a few of them remain. All right, we're coming up here on our first commercial break. We're going to do a couple of commercials, come on back. Then we're going to be talking about interesting things up in Afghanistan are going on. We'll be right back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, apparently, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, along with U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis, arrived in Afghanistan, in Kabul, for an unannounced visit. But it looks like somebody got the word because apparently 20 rockets struck the airport and surrounding areas. And Mattis is already out there saying, this was an assassination attempt on me. Well, I think Stoltenberg may have another view about it. But it looks like Afghanistan is not as pacified to the U.S. point of view as we've all been led to believe here. So let's talk about North Korea, because that situation seems to be heating up, even though it's not getting a lot of coverage on the corporate media. For some reason, it sort of got pushed off to one side by all this NFL taking the knee thing. And, of course, today they're talking about the GOP tax cut plan and whether it's going to actually bring tax relief to ordinary people or if it's really just another giveaway to the corporate interests. And you can probably guess which way it's going to go. But Trump is out there saying that he is prepared to take devastating military action to end the tensions. Well, that is really not necessary. You could end the tensions by not having your warplanes and warships flying around and sailing around North Korea. There is no reason why these drills with South Korea and Japan can't be held someplace else in the region, like between South Korea and Japan, which would be more convenient for everybody. So if there's tension in North Korea, it is because of all the U.S. rhetoric, such as Donald Trump's UN speech, and this continued rattling of sabers, and that's what's created the tension. And so the U.S. has created a problem in North Korea, and they're going to use that problem to justify a military attack here. Now, interestingly enough, the Joint Chiefs Chairman is out there saying that despite all the bluff and bluster and everything going on, he has not seen any real shifts in North Korea's military posture. So it doesn't look like they're getting ready to do anything dramatic, although there is a report that they did move some radars and other defensive facilities to their eastern coast, where these U.S. bombers are flying back and forth. Now, the Joint Chiefs Chair is also out there saying that at this point, you should assume that North Korea missiles can hit the U.S., Guam, Hawaii, Alaska, western half of the U.S., the Taepodong, too, if they can get that to fly, that can hit anywhere in the continental United States of America. And it's only a matter of time before they do have a nuclear warhead that will fit on it. And so intelligence officials believe that North Korea will be capable of hitting the United States with a nuclear weapon by late 2018. But remember, these are the same intelligence officials who were convinced the Soviet Union wouldn't have a nuclear bomb until the mid-50s, and they set one off in 1949. Now, they're sending the USS Ronald Reagan supercarrier to conduct more exercises off the Korean Peninsula. Really? Is there a specific reason why the USS Ronald Reagan has to be off the Korean Peninsula? It's more saber rattling, and that is increasing the tensions. And Ron Paul is right. If you want to defuse this situation, you back off all the threatening postures with the weapons. And remember, North Korea has done nothing to date other than test their defensive, their deterrent system. They haven't attacked anybody. They haven't nuked anybody. They have been firing test missiles, as Russia has been doing, as the United States does all the time. It is the United States that is taking a threatening posture toward North Korea. You don't see North Korean warplanes and ships sailing along our coastlines, do you? We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call now from Steve in Massachusetts. Steve, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just want to talk to you briefly about what's happening with the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing smells fishy to me. It smells like, to me, it's more of the same division of American people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been hijacked. And I think they're trying to destroy, really, the one sport that unites all the American culture, you know, all the American people together. which is football. You know, Americans.
I thought it was baseball.
It used to be baseball.
Okay.
But now it's football. You know, Americans get together all with their buddies, whether it be black or white, and they get together and watch a game of football. And you look now at what's happening over the past couple of days. You get fans burning their tickets to football, burning their jerseys. You know, they're going against the one thing that pretty much unites us, and I think it's been hijacked. That's just my opinion. But
no, I'm in agreement with you. This came out of nowhere, and it just blossomed so fast. It felt to me like it was orchestrated. I'm trying to figure out what the real goal was, and I don't think it was necessarily more divide and conquer. I think it was part of this trying to sell the American people on the idea that our current government is obsolete, that it is racist, that it's full of white supremacists. And it backfired tremendously, and I think that's why it's starting to fade away already. And by the way, I'm not doing any more stories about the NFL on the radio show because I think it's a complete waste of time. But I think the reason people are agreeing with Donald Trump's war on the NFL, as I said yesterday, Americans may not like the way the federal government is running this country. According to Gallup, 71% of Americans do not think the federal government is doing a good job for the American people of the nation. But we still love our nation, and we love our fellow citizens, and we want our nation to be great again. We want to preserve our nation, our history, and our culture. And we're tired of all these attacks that are coming from all these different directions that are trying to trick us into surrendering our history. The latest one being this claim that the national anthem represents white supremacy.
Yeah, it's too much of a trend that's happening. It's a little too much to be a coincidence.
Yeah, it felt contrived.
I feel the same. I feel like the flag doesn't represent the government, but the people itself. And if you go against that, you're pretty much going, regardless of what you think of the government, yeah, the government's doing a lot of bad things, but the flag unites us as a people.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously I'm critical of the government. I don't have a problem displaying the American flag. In fact, I got one over there on the other side of the room, hanging from a mast. And, yeah, because that flag doesn't represent the government. It represents the American people and the American nation. And when these athletes are disrespecting the flag, it's really disrespecting the American people and the nation, rather than what they claim to be protesting, which is police brutality and all the rest of it. But again, it felt contrived to me.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I just wanted to state that because, I don't know, it just smelled fishy to me. It really did.
I agree. Absolutely. All right, thanks an awful lot, Steve. We're going to let you go here. Speaking of contrived, story that came on out in Sputnik News, Trump says North Korea tortured Otto Warmbier beyond belief. Now, they're talking about this young man who was held captive, detained by the North Korean government for 15 months on suspicion of espionage, and he was returned home in basically a medically induced coma in June, and he passed away a few days later. And so now Donald Trump is out there saying North Korea brutally tortured U.S. student Otto Warmbier, and basically this is in response to a Fox News interview with Warmbier's parents. So this is more demonization. I put a Bex alert on this. More demonization. And let's be honest, after Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo and all that went on at all these various CIA clandestine torture sites around the world, the United States government lacks moral authority to question other countries' use of torture. But as it turns out, my Bex alert was justified because Otto Warmbier's parents, his father, Fred Warmbier, on the Fox and Friends interview, said that when his son was released, it, quote, looked like someone had taken a pair of pliers and rearranged his bottom teeth. They're the ones out there pushing this. He was tortured horribly. We're the victims here. But the Cincinnati Enquirer yesterday obtained the Hamilton County Coroner's report, which reported that Otto's teeth were in natural and good repair. His body was well developed and well nourished. The coroner found a collection of 10 scars on his body, but they weren't scars that indicated he was tortured. The whole story is just, it's Saddam's nukes all over again. And how they got his parents to go along with it, we don't know, but they did. And they went on Fox and Friends and said, oh, North Korea is torturing the people. Well, so is the United States. Big deal. The U.S. set the precedent at Abu Ghraib. But as it turns out, the story is another fiction. How many more times are you going to have to be lied to until you understand everything coming from the federal government and the corporate media is just another lie to get you to do what they want you to do, because that's all they know how to do. They can't run a country any other way than tricking you into doing what they want. They've been doing it for so long, they've forgotten any other way to run a society. Now, along with North Korea, and perhaps lost amid all the noise, tensions with China are still rising over the South China Sea, and now there is a new issue, if you will. The U.S. House of Representatives last August passed the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2018, and it included an item to allow the warships of the United States and Taiwan to dock at each other's ports. Okay, no big deal, sounds good. The bill is going to the Senate for consideration. Apparently, it's expected Trump will sign the bill into law. Now, China is very upset because they consider U.S. military warships in Taiwan to be a move toward Taiwan independence. And they're saying that China will aggressively attack U.S. naval ships docking in Taiwan. Now, I don't think they necessarily mean going out there with the bombers. I think they mean aggressively attack this idea that U.S. warships will dock in Taiwan. It's a very symbolic moment in this long contest where Taiwan wants to be independent. And here you have Donald Trump saying the Kurdistan should be independent. Maybe he's going to say the same thing about Taiwan. But China is absolutely not happy about any of this. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. Ernest in Nevada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I wanted to make a statement about the NFL thing, but I just wanted to point out that as far as this North Korea setup that we're seeing, the other day you heard about how Fox was reporting that North Korea is manufacturing micro nukes, okay? And we also heard about...
Yeah, let's respond to that one. First of all, I didn't see that report. If I had, I would have been right on top of it. The idea of a micro nuke is something that comes out of movies. Okay, for a nuclear weapon to work, there has to be a minimum size of the uranium primer. That's called the critical mass. You can't go below it, or it simply will not work. Now, there was an idea of what was called a so-called suitcase nuke. It was a very big suitcase. All that was the primary out of a multi-stage thermonuclear device, where they would get rid of the outer casing, they'd get rid of the deuterium, tritium, secondary, the fusion pit, and they would just go with that smaller nuclear weapon as a primary, because that could be concealed in basically more of a crate than a suitcase. But this idea of micro nukes, it's science fiction.
Okay, but this was reported in Fox, so to me that did associate with the suitcase bombs that we used to hear about. And also, they also mentioned another report how Long Beach was seen as a possible type of terrorist, where California was gearing up for something that might happen. Yes. Another setup thing. And if we remember, Long Beach, that has been a large portion of their docks have been under the control of the Red China since the 1990s.
Yes.
You know that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so to me, that sounds very, highly, questionable. Why would Long Beach and Red China and all of that come up in the mix? I mean, that's pretty questionable to me. I mean, we already know that Clinton was president, that he finalized the deal to give Red China control of the Panama Canal, along with these ports in Southern California, like Long Beach. And he also gave North Korea nuclear technology, along with the missile technology guidance systems he gave to China.
Yes.
Why don't we hear that? I mean, are these guys like bulletproof or something?
Apparently, they have the information to blackmail the entire government. And like I said, it all goes back to that CIA gun and drug running operation out of Mena, Arkansas in the 1980s. And if the American people were forced to confront the reality that the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the government itself, the government would come crashing down. Nobody is going to want to obey a government that is itself engaging in the worst sorts of crime and bringing in these drugs and selling them to our children in the streets, and now overprescribing them in the doctor's offices and the pharmacies.
Right. There's a lot of things that they can blackmail each other on. They all know where the bodies are.
Yes.
Anyway, I did call about, I wanted to put in a word about the NFL, and I know you heard a lot about the NFL, but...
Too much.
But you see, Kaepernick himself, I mean, when he did that, he was already on his way out. He knew it. His performance after the first year and a half was going down, and the reality is that he is not an NFL quarterback. He does not have the mental acumen to be a successful NFL quarterback. He was an athlete taking snaps. When they figured him out, when they adapted to his strengths and weaknesses, he could not adapt. Because to be an NFL quarterback, you have to be like the memory of a accountant with mental sharpness and processing speed of a fighter pilot. I mean, that's the whole thing, is he didn't have that. Mentally, he was not fit to be a quarterback. But nobody says that. It's all about the race thing.
Yes. Yeah,
so
well, I mean, professional sports is theater to a certain degree. I mean, obviously, football and baseball, setting aside scandals like the Chicago Black Sox, you're seeing an honest outcome of the game, unlike professional wrestling. But it's still all theater, and it's all pandering to the crowd. And again, he may have realized because his career was coming to an end, somebody made him a deal and said, we're going to give you such and such money to kneel during the anthem. But like I told that other caller, it feels contrived to me. Frankly, I'm kind of sick of this whole NFL stuff myself right now.
Mike, but I believe that the NFL is on its way out, and not just because of that, but the whole thing about globalization is that the world sport is really, if you talk about football, it's soccer. It's not football, and this is part of the plan to, like that earlier caller said, to take away our national, culture. And football is one of them. And the people that follow football the most are the people of our generation. This younger generation, they're not really football fans. That's why that, this aside, I do believe that this sport is on the decline because the young people, they don't care about football. I mean, there's a few that are into the fantasy numbers, their performances, but that's not really football.
Well, I think the younger generation is getting more and more into the virtual world with their computer games and real life, like football and basketball and baseball. Yes, there are computer equivalents of it, but you look at some of the modern computer games, there's really no comparison. And so I think that's a factor as well. And people's tastes change with time. There was a time in my life when I was a big fan of synchronized swimming, but then my favorite team drowned and I lost interest.
Drowned? What do you mean drowned?
It's an attempt at humor.
Anyway, Mike, the thing that we have to, that really astounds me is that these people are reacting to individual single events that happen. We have a country of 320 million people. But if CNN puts up one incident of a black being abused, you got the whole country acting like it's a national crisis.
Not as much anymore because hardly anybody's watching CNN. That's something you need to take into consideration. More and more people are coming to the Internet, to the independent media to find out what's going on. The ratings for CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, all of those, PBS, NPR, they are in serious, serious trouble. Their viewership numbers are really, really low, and they're losing advertising revenues. They're running heavily in the red. And they're not the force for shaping the society that they were one time. They still like to think they are. They still like to pretend that they are. As part of the illusion.
But they are influencing the key groups that they want to influence. Is that it's like if one incident happens to a Hispanic or an Asian, they don't put it up there because they don't get the reaction they want. If one incident happens, like a Freddie Gray, they got the whole country,
okay,
the majority of the blacks
Ernest, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're almost at commercial break. I want to point something out to you. Remember back when we had the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman situation, where George Zimmerman was on trial for the murder of Trayvon Martin, and for the whole week before the verdict came back, all of the corporate media, including CNN, was saying, if he's acquitted, there'll be riots all across the street. If he's acquitted, there'll be riots all across the street. And he was acquitted, and there were no riots. That shows you just how much influence the corporate media has lost in our society. They don't want to admit it. They don't want to lose, those high-paying jobs and everything, but they're not the influence they used to be. What we have out here on the Internet is a distributed independent media where there are hundreds and hundreds of websites and online radio shows preserving and protecting a diversity of opinion so that people can listen to the various shows, read the various websites, and come to their own conclusions. That's the way media is supposed to work. Anyway, Ernest, we got to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Mike, your previous caller, I got to respond to him. Stop watching Fox News, please.
Yeah.
No, it's not funny, Mike. They might say things that you might agree with, but remember the Iraq War? They are part of the same, they have their own agenda. They all follow the same script. Even I like Tucker Carlson, but you can see they all read off a script. They all read off a script. They follow the agenda. They might have minor differences with the Democrats, but, just look at the Iraq War. They peddled that thing. They had Saddam's bomb maker, fake guy on after the war started, disappeared off the face of the planet. Then the other guy, remember the fake CIA guy they had on there? I forgot his name, but
yes.
They had that CIA guy, and then all of a sudden they found out he wasn't real. You don't think they knew that? People, please stop watching Fox. Do your own research. And you're right, Mike. There's a suitcase nuke is like the size of a crate, and it takes Arnold Schwarzenegger and his son to carry it because
not quite. The very smallest nuclear warhead that the United States ever developed was for a system called Davy Crockett, and it actually weighed just 51 pounds, and it's the smallest warhead possible. Had a yield of about 20 tons of TNT. And it was remarkable for its size, but it was still very large. It wouldn't fit in a suitcase.
But that's the total weight of the unit, and then it wasn't at a mortar also, and you don't want to be shooting it off, because I think the wind blows back at you.
Well, yeah, it had to be launched with a recoilless rifle or an artillery piece. They had a couple of different launching methods for it. They only ever really, I think, tested it a couple of times out in Nevada, and it was sort of seen as kind of impractical because there are cheaper ways to deliver 20 tons of explosive onto a target without having to build a nuclear weapon.
And I bet you all the guys' their hair fell out.
Well, certainly during I think it was the Upshot Knoll Hill tests is when they set off a bomb in the desert and had an Army squad march into the breach to see if they could exploit a breach in the enemy's lines created by a nuclear bomb. And yeah, all those soldiers for the rest of their lives, the only protection they had were sunglasses, Ray-Bans. And for the rest of their lives, they had leukemias and cancers, and the attitude of the government was, as it is today with our returning veterans from the war, hey, bad things happen in war, this is what you signed up for, and we're not really responsible.
Hey, Mike, I watched Ron Paul report. Everybody needs to watch that about the NFL thing. You talked about this, about how they militarize NFL, NASCAR, gets over $100 million to indoctrinate you to be militaristic, to be for that war. You know, that's why the Pentagon funds, you know, gives money to the NFL. It's not to, hey, we have pride. They're doing that so they want you to sign up to go fight in their to justify their wars.
Well, it's a little
Thanks,
more,
Mike.
You're welcome. It's a little more subtle than that, and I'll comment on that when we come back from station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Responding to that issue about how the government, up until very recently, was paying money to sports teams and sports events to have these displays of patriotism. And yes, part of it is the hope that young people will be seduced into signing up for the military. But it's actually a lot more fundamental for that. And it's the same reason the Roman emperors were paying for the gladiatorial games. Sports fires up the imagination. People get excited. It's an emotional release. And the goal of the propaganda, the red, white, and blue, and the bunting, is to link that excitement to the government, to transfer it over from the athletes or the gladiators who are actually out there creating that excitement to the emperor or the government. It's a very fundamental system of making the government feel like it's good, even if it really isn't. So in a very real way, we are in the bread and circuses phase of the United States. All right, we're going to take some more phone calls. Ramsey in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm fine. You're on the air.
Yes. You see, sir, you said last week that you love Canada. I just want to tell you that Canada loves you too as well.
Well, thank you.
I'm sorry?
I said thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you. Yes, sir. Here's the point I want to make. The Kurdish people flying Israeli flags. You see, sir, these people, the Israelis put them on made an ambush, and the Kurds fell right into it. And the Kurds doing that, they're giving the Arabs, the Turks, the Iranians, and so on, all the ammunition to attack the Kurds. So I think that the Kurds were completely, what they did was very, very stupid. And also, sir, the oil that in the Kurdish area, in northern Iraq or the west of Iraq or whatever, that oil belongs to the Iraqi government.
Well, I think the Kurds are counting on the fact that if they do go ahead and secede, and remember, this was a non-binding referendum. The Kurdish regional government is not compelled to take any action at this time. They're just talking about it. But I think the belief in the Kurdish region is the United States is going to come on in on their side. And certainly that's been the indications we're getting out of Washington, D.C. And I imagine that Israel would fly a few planes over the other countries to try and scare them off from invading. But remember, it's been a long-term goal of both Israel and the United States to re-Balkanize the Middle East, of smashing up all those countries into smaller pieces that are easier to bully. The only ones being not touched were Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon, although I think Lebanon is now off the safe list.
Yes. But see, sir, do you agree with me that the Kurds got trapped or ambushed by the Israelis?
I don't think it's an ambush, but there's no question that Israel is supporting them out of Israel's interest, not the Kurds.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to George in San Francisco. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha, Mike. It's good to talk to you. You know, you made a comment about bread and circuses, and I was just thinking to myself, you know, if only we could at least lose some weight from eating nothing burgers at our bread and circuses.
I like it. I like it. That would be there's a graphic in there somewhere. I'm going to have to work on that.
Okay, sounds like fun. This September, we haven't heard much about this, but this September is the 230th anniversary of the signing of the U.S. Constitution.
Yes.
And I think we need to talk about it more. You know, you've talked in the past about how everything could collapse. And if our government does collapse from all the weight of all this corruption that we've seen over the last 100+ years, it would be nice if people could at least know, more of our public could know what this Constitution was, what it really stood for, what it would mean to our country and to our people if our government actually upheld it, which they don't so much of the time. And I look at what's happened over this summer, and we see all this stuff about, our country is racist, or our country surrendering our history, largely based now on our country is racist, and I just see a great big con job like 9/11 being played out on us again. It's problem, reaction, solution, the Hegelian dialectic once again. And I mean, do you see what I see? That I think this is like additional salvos in the con job to convince the American people that our country is racist, our Constitution is racist, and we've got to abandon it for a shiny new North American Union where it's politically correct and all the Mexico and United States and Canada can get along and everything is and there's no racism here. Do you see that as I'm seeing this as the long-range game plan to get the American people behind surrendering our Constitution for a North American Union or something similar?
Well, that's certainly the agenda of the globalists, the New World Order supporters, but it's in direct contrast with the war agenda, which is only able to convince the American people that we should go to war in these other countries with this idea that the United States is an exceptional nation, and therefore we have a right to be the world's policeman. So you can't have it both ways. And these two agendas are at war with each other. You can't come along and say that America is racist and it's white supremacist and it's got all these problems and we should tear down the flag. You're not going to get the population saying, yeah, let's go and invade somebody else this week, because they need our help. The two are just diametrically opposed.
It sounds like what you're saying we're in is a mode of hypocritical schizophrenia.
Certainly people can be forgiven for feeling like that, but what we're actually seeing is that our system is very badly factionalized. You have the war party on one hand. You have the globalists on another. They're working at cross purposes. You have the anti-Trumpers who are still trying to find a way to delegitimize last year's elections. Our government is badly factionalized. And that, too, is another symptom that we saw in the former Soviet Union in the months leading up to its collapse.
I think that, it's interesting that white privilege is being pushed at a time when all of us need to be uniting against bankster privilege, too big to fail, and Hillary privilege, too evil to jail, those kinds of things. We all need to unite against that.
I absolutely agree. And keeping us divided is part of the plan to protect those in power. Nothing new there. They did it back in the 1960s when COINTELPRO tried to stop the anti-war movement, first of all with a bunch of dirty tricks like the staged riot at Disneyland, and by fanning up racial tension between blacks and whites. So we were screaming at each other rather than uniting against that Vietnam War. Now, eventually we did. We had leaders like Martin Luther King who were able to reach across that racial divide and say, look, there's a larger issue here, and that is our kids, white and black, are being killed and crippled on this pointless war on the other side of the planet. And that was a big reason for his assassination, because he was starting to turn the civil rights movement and its political power into an anti-war movement. And that made him a real threat to the system.
I think that he and Malcolm X were trying to join forces for the same purpose. And that's what made it dangerous for both of them. And they were both killed over this. All right. Thank you very much, Michael. Have a great show. I got to go now.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Michelle in Illinois. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. I actually have one good show people, if they're going to watch Fox, that's the only show kind of I watch. It's called, I think it's The New Revolution, but it's called, his section is called Swamp Watch.
Yes.
And it's very interesting. It's by Steve Hilton. And he goes, about he talks about the health care, he talks about tech, he talks about everything that, during the swamp.
Well, unfortunately, the swamp...
And each week... It's called The Swamp Watch.
Yes.
But I think his show is called The New Revolution, and it's by Steve Hilton. It's on Fox News. I have like an app. It's Fox News, but yeah, I think he's still on TV. But each week he goes by a different. Actually, I think he was kind of put in there. I think by a friend who's currently in our White House. And I think, that's, people don't know that, but I think that's one of his good friends. So he's trying to drain it out outside the White House, and this is one way he's doing it.
Well, we're definitely going to have to drain the swamp from outside because, unfortunately, Donald Trump's plan to drain the swamp failed miserably because he's hired most of the alligators and water moccasins to be his White House staff. That was
exactly.
his biggest mistake.
Actually, this is one of his friends, I think. But it's interesting because he talks about the corruption of healthcare, about tech, about everything, all corruption, which is kind of interesting. It's the only kind of show I watch basically because, like, you're right, a lot of it is, Steve Jobs has some good things, maybe, Tucker has some good things, but, they have to say what they have to say, I guess. But I don't know about this guy. He's the newest guy. He's the newest show on Fox.
All right.
There's hardly any advertisements about his show.
Well,
ever.
We'll have to keep an eye out for it. I'll try and catch it or DVR it. And thank you very much for the phone.
Let's see what I think he's talking about Google this week.
Well, there's lots
Google,
to talk about over there.
There's
There's lots to talk about that. Okay, Michelle, going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. We're going to take another phone call and then try and get back to the news. Laura in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just a quick call. There's a book out. It's called The Six Is In by Brian Touhy, Touhy. And it's about how crooked and corrupt the NFL is.
Yeah.
And all these games, people wouldn't have such loyalty if they know before the season starts who's going to be in the Super Bowl. And this guy goes through all of this. They have squads, like when the team members get in trouble, maybe rape a woman or whatever, they got squads to cover it up. And this guy goes through all the corruption of I call it National Fraud League. Brian Touhy. And you can get the book on Amazon. I think it's $12.
Well, I can understand that probably there would be vested interests in trying to steer a Super Bowl lineup that would attract the most viewers, the most people buying tickets, souvenirs, and so forth and so on, and that can skew a lot of decisions. I kind of went through the same thing in Hollywood when I worked on a movie called Stargate, and we were nominated, and then the Blue Ribbon Committee just threw us out of the running. Most people don't know that the Academy Awards, there's a special Blue Ribbon Committee that pares down the nominees, and their basis for deciding who's the final nominee or not is who can financially exploit winning the Oscar more. And the company that produced Stargate was actually in serious trouble at the time. They couldn't maximize it. So the Blue Ribbon Committee said, well, it would be a waste of time giving them the Academy Award for Special Effects. So the Academy Award for Special Effects that year went to Speed, the one about the bus with the bomb, and most of those effects weren't even visual effects, they were practical. And we felt a little bit cheated. So if such things are going on in the NFL, that's probably the motive and the reason for it. The world of sports has had a lot of crooks in there, like I mentioned earlier, the Chicago Black Sox scandal. We know that horse race fixing and prize fight fixing is a very common thing. So why should football, or for that matter, basketball or baseball, be any different?
Right. When Brian explains, every Sunday, millions of dollars are exchanged in bets, even in Las Vegas.
Yes.
And so you're talking about millions and millions of dollars. If you don't think it's not manipulated,
Well, I'm not a big football fan anyway, and I have more pressing things to be paying attention to right now. Laura, you said this was going to be a quick call, and I think we've gone on long enough, so thank you very much. We're going to let you go. I'm going to get back to the news here. Over in Europe, in Sweden, near the town of Trosa, south of Stockholm, they were holding this Aurora 17 military exercise, which Sweden advertised as the largest one since the end of the Cold War era, as well as the first one to feature U.S. tanks on Swedish soil. And it was all going really well until one of those tanks was in the wrong place at the wrong time and a train hit it and derailed. Now, I'm kind of wondering if the driver of that tank had the same attitude as the commanders of the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain. I can go where I want, and it's up to the train to stop. Obviously not understanding that trains can take a long time to stop. All right, let's talk about the economy now. Huge settlement decision against J.P. Morgan again. They really are all crooks over there. Down in Dallas, a jury has ordered J.P. Morgan Chase to pay more than $4 billion in damages, that's with a B, for mishandling the estate of a former American Airlines executive. And Joe Hopper and two stepchildren won a probate court verdict over claims that J.P. Morgan mismanaged the administration of the estate of Max Hopper, who was described as an airline technology innovator by the family's law firm. The bank was hired by the family in 2010 to independently administer the estate of Hopper, was found in breach of its fiduciary duties and contract. And J.P. Morgan Chase was ordered to pay $4.7 million in actual damages. That's how much they lost to mismanagement. But then they were ordered to pay $4 billion in punitive damages. Somebody's sending a message with that one, plus $5 million to cover the attorney's fee for the Hopper family. Now, I have no doubt J.P. Morgan is going to try and appeal this all the way up to the Supreme Court and stall. They may offer an out-of-court settlement for a fraction of the money and say, we'll stop appealing and you'll take this. So it's not over. But it is significant that finally we're starting to see the courts stand up to these Wall Street money junkies, especially when they're caught not doing their job properly or, in even more extreme cases, being downright crooks. Now, Standard & Poor's has just downgraded the credit rating for Hartford, Connecticut, to deep junk. Now, 2 months ago, they cut the bond rating from BB plus to BB minus, citing growing liquidity pressures, weaker market access. And today, S&P downgraded their bond rating by a whopping 4 notches deeper into junk, from BB minus to CC, stating that a default, a distressed exchange, or redemption appears to be a virtual certainty. But on the other hand, that brand new stadium built at taxpayer expense for the minor league baseball team downtown sure looks swell, doesn't it? That's looking really, really spiffy. Now, over at the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen has backed off talking about major inflation around the corner and is now out there trying to reassure everybody that inflation will be held to just 2% over the next few years. Not really sure if I believe that. We're going to go back to the phones here. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Steve, are you there? Okay, I guess not. Now, we all know about Rolling Stone magazine. It's been an icon for a long time. It's about 50 years old, I think. I remember when it started up, I was just a kid. And they even have a song about it, you know, getting your face on the cover of the Rolling Stone. And it was a counterculture magazine. And they've got some good writers over there like Matt Taibbi. But they have been in a bit of dire straits, and it all goes back. All right, I'm going to finish the story, then I'll take the phone call. It all goes back to 2014. Remember when Rolling Stones ran that article about a gang rape at the University of Virginia, and it was picked up by the corporate media all over and just made a huge cause célèbre. More about this when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Rolling Stones. Been around for a lot of years. And back in 2014, they ran an article about a gang rape at the University of Virginia. And almost immediately, people were calling the article into question because, as the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism pointed out, there were fundamental journalistic failures in the way the article was presented. And the article had to be retracted. It was turned out it was just a fabrication. It prompted 3 libel lawsuits against Rolling Stones, one of which led to a highly publicized trial that culminated with a federal jury awarding the plaintiff $3 million in damages. Now, basically what happened is Rolling Stone failed to engage in basic fact-checking about the UVA story because the publishers wanted it to be true. The narrative aligned with the publication's politically correct, facts-optional, activist agenda, which is now commonplace throughout the entire corporate media. But what has resulted is it put Rolling Stone into serious financial difficulty, and now it is for sale. Their credibility has collapsed since 2014, except for Matt Taibbi. He's still doing some great work out there. But because of this fake campus rape news, which they published to appease feminists and sell more we're going to sell Rolling Stone to the feminists. We'll have a rape story. And they're in trouble, and now they're for sale. So if you've ever wanted to own Rolling Stone magazine and you've got a few bucks stashed away, now's your opportunity. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. David in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine.
Okay. James Fetzer, of course, a notable researcher, was on the Power Hour the other day, and he had mentioned that he had asked you for a discussion or a debate on 911. You didn't show.
No, that's not what happened.
Why.
That's not what happened.
Okay, what happened?
Okay, Fetzer said he wanted to debate me about 9/11 on InfoWars, and I said I would agree to that, and apparently InfoWars didn't want to do that. And Fetzer then demanded to come on to my show with his ideas, and I said, no, I don't feel like debating something that's been done all over again. But Fetzer is out there. He's one of these people claiming that not only was there no plane at the Pentagon, there were no planes at the World Trade Towers. We were all seeing holograms. There was no thermite in the towers. They were using micro-nukes and a bunch of other stuff like that. And since we're on the topic here, and I'm probably going to have to go through the commercial break with this, I am amazed at how many people love to use the word hologram without really knowing how holography works. And it doesn't help that the name has been applied to 3D projection techniques that are not technically holographic. And this is important because the parties trying to muddy the issue of 9/11 have suggested that there were no planes, and we were seeing holograms of airplanes up in the skies. And this is what comes from watching too much science fiction and thinking the visual effects represent something real. So the process...
Can you keep me?
I'm sorry?
I just said you had to go to the break. Can you keep me over?
Yeah, I'm going to keep you over, but we're still not at the break yet. Now, the process of making a hologram in its simplest form, and I did this myself when I was in college physics, so I know what I'm talking about here. You take a laser beam, you split it into 2 beams. Both beams go through concave lenses to spread them out. One beam falls directly onto a high-density photographic plate. This is called the reference beam. The other laser beam shines on the object to be captured in the hologram, and that reflected light interacts with the reference beam at the photographic plate to form an interference pattern. That photographic plate is the hologram. And after the holographic plate is developed, a light shown on the plate will be diffracted by the interference pattern to reconstruct the image of the object. Now, here is the important part. To see the reconstructed image in a hologram, you must be looking at or through the hologram plate, which is quite a trick when you're trying to cover all of lower Manhattan, especially for an animated image. Now, there's another aspect, and we're going to take our commercial break, and I'll come back to this issue about why people don't understand holograms, and you need to spot when you're being led astray. We'll be right back after these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about the oft-made claim that there were no planes at the Pentagon or the World Trade Centers on 9/11, and we were all seeing holograms. And it is important to understand what holograms are and what they can do, and more importantly, what they cannot do. And we've already mentioned that if you're seeing a true 3D hologram, and the hologram is the plate, you have to be looking at it or through it, which when you're talking about all the eyewitnesses all over the southern part of Manhattan Island, that's a big piece of glass, especially for an animated image, which has to be whizzing back and forth. Obviously impractical. Now, you can use a laser beam directed on that plate to project an image of what the object looked like from that one point on the plate, but it won't behave like a 3D object as you move around the room. And obviously, there must be something to project onto. This idea that a hologram can just project into space, it's science fiction. We saw it in the first Star Wars with the little message of Princess Leia, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi." But here's the important part. Here's the important part. No holographic image, whether projected or looking at through the plate, can block out the background. If there is light coming from the rear, it will be seen right through the holographic image, which is why holograms, like projected motion pictures, are best shown in darkened environments. Now, looking at all the photos and videos of the 9/11 planes at the World Trade Center, it is clear you do not see them. They do not appear. You do not see the background. They do not appear to be transparent. Therefore, they cannot be projections, holographic or otherwise. And we have been down this time and time again, and this nonsensical stuff about micronukes and holograms is seized on by the corporate media to try and ridicule the 9/11 truth movement. And legitimate researchers like Richard Gage won't go anywhere near this stuff, and neither will I. So thank you very much for the phone call, Terry, and we're going to let you go here because we got another caller waiting on the line. James in Atlanta, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Asked about Paul Manafort.
Yes.
Someone had said that Mueller was going back 11 years, and I know you're not an attorney, but do you know about what statutes of limitations might be, and if they just kind of like get into everything, is there any kind of statute of limitations for anything he might have done?
There probably are. There are a few crimes for which there are no statute of limitations, but I would have to research that, and I'd have to look for that.
But that 11 years seems like a long time. That's even before Obama was in office. That's back when Bush was in office.
Well, certain kinds of fraud, the statute of limitations is like 20 years. There is no statute of limitations on murder. Again, we'd have to basically take a look exactly what is he being charged with. There are apparently some tax issues. I think the statute of limitations on that is 5 years, but again, I'm not an expert. I'm kind of guessing at that.
It just seems like the way politics works, if he had been like a bad person, it would have come out before now. You know what I mean? Somebody else would have dug it up even when the election was going on.
Oh, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. They're trying to find something that they can turn into a scandal to harm Donald Trump. And it's really pathetic when you see how hard they're working to not look at everything that Hillary Clinton was doing, that James Comey was doing, that Loretta Lynch was doing. And remember, they're all tied together by that narcocracy. Because James Comey was on the board of directors for HSBC when it was caught laundering drug money. And Loretta Lynch was the U.S. Attorney for New York, who basically gave HSBC a wrist slap and let him go. And so all of a sudden she's the Attorney General and James Comey's head of the FBI, and they're both out there trying to protect Hillary Clinton, who's neck deep in that whole CIA drug-running, gun-running operation out of Arkansas.
Well, maybe one day we'll find out, but that seems like 11 years is a long time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call, and it's a very good question. I think we still have one more caller waiting on the line. Is that Terry? No, we got Terry in Oregon. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, just as those movies about those airplanes running into the Pan Am building kind of got people prepped for 9/11, maybe that hacking of the Sony pictures got us all prepped for a cyber attack from North Korea on one of the power grids in a big city to to be a false flag, and just think how simple that would be compared to all the logistics involved with something like 9/11.
Well, I've often thought that the next 9/11 might be, bringing down the internet and all the computer grids. It would certainly solve the problem of the independent media for the government and the corporate media. But just to be very accurate here, it turned out that Sony hack wasn't a hack. It was an internal leak, just like the DNC emails.
Right. So let me ask you about an EMP. I think they have EMP weapons that aren't nuclear weapons now. Is that correct?
To the best of my knowledge, you have to have a nuclear weapon to generate the intense field for an electromagnetic pulse. I remember seeing a diagram for something that was supposed to be a non-nuclear electromagnetic pulse weapon, but it didn't look to me like it could actually work.
Okay, because I was going to say, he didn't have to get a nuclear weapon, just get a rocket somewhere in the air over one of the U.S. coast, and he knocked that thing off, and all of a sudden you got an EMP, but I thought I saw him on some kind of defense publication, but I could be wrong. Okay, Mike, time for you to get on, and I appreciate my comments.
All right, well, thank you very much here. And, to generate an electromagnetic pulse, you have got to put a serious dent in the Earth's magnetic field, and that takes a lot of energy. And if it isn't nuclear, it's going to be something that has the same amount of energy available to it. So we need to basically keep our eye on the ball on that one. All right, we're going to switch over to Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Much. I have 4 distinct citations. You mentioned Sweden, right?
Yes.
Some military exercise there.
Yeah, a little bit of a whoopsie. A train hit a tank.
I agree with you entirely, by the way. I agree totally. But I was on YouTube past couple nights, and I came upon a presentation about, the European migration invasion.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this woman, Barbara Spector. I forgot her whole name, but Barbara and Spector, that's her last name. She organized some kind of a migration invasion organization out of Sweden, which I can't recall, but it's on YouTube. I hope your audience will take the time to seek it out, because it blew me away when she said that, quote, this is her quote, this isn't my quote, her quote, we Jews are at the center of this forced migration into Europe. Multiculturalism will happen, or Europe will die. Okay.
That's an interesting quote.
That's her word. That's her words. Now, when I scrolled down and that's only like 7 minutes, Michael. It blew me away. I saw it 2 or 3 or 4 times. Then I scrolled down in the roster on YouTube, and I come upon this here. It says, Zionist Jews brag of being the center of Muslim invasion. Okay, Zionist Jews brag of being center of Muslim invasion. They actually are interviewing some Shabbat Lubavitch rabbis. Okay, that's one. And then the next one, Satanic Judaism, it's Talmud exposed. Satanic Judaism, it's Talmud exposed. Now, in order for me to see that, Michael, I had to actually log in. I had to log in, give private information about my identity and age, or I couldn't see it. Okay, now, relative to, as I told the board up, Washington, D.C. is a swamp. Now, I do recall learning that D.C. was, in fact, a swamp before it was built up.
Yeah, it was a real swamp, malarial swamp.
Yeah. Now listen to this, okay? On YouTube, my favorite go-to place, there's this group of honorable Hebrew American people who did a stellar compilation of facts regarding Trump being the swamp. That's the title of Trump is the Swamp / Trump's Elite Jewish Mafia. That's their presentation, not mine. Trump is the swamp. Trump's elite Jewish mafia. Okay, now lastly, on 9/11, Michael, I saw with my own eyes and heard with my own ears. I was glued to TV on that morning. Jamie McIntyre was CNN's man on the scene at the Pentagon. His exact words, well, I'm paraphrasing now, but pretty accurately, he stated, gee, folks, a 757 should have fuselage debris, there should be engines, there should, it wouldn't just disintegrate and vaporize, would it?
No, what it did is it punched through the ground floor into the inside of the building, and then the floors over it collapsed down, and that's why there wasn't an obvious hole. But again, if you go to my page on the Pod People, there are photos from inside the Pentagon showing the recognizable components of the airplane. And remember, airplanes are built very light so that they can fly and go long distances on the least amount of fuel. They're not going to act like Wile E. Coyote in the Roadrunner movies and leave a clean cookie-cutter outline in a brick wall. The real world doesn't operate like that. If you want a model for what happened...
Michael, there was no debris. The trees weren't cut down. The wires weren't down. The surveillance camera video footage was never disclosed. John Lear, I'll tell you what, I've never been a pilot. John Lear was all of his life, okay? Yeah, and he even flew for CIA, okay?
Okay,
Fred,
there
were no planes.
Fred.
It's physically...
Fred, all right, we're going to drop Fred here because what he's saying is not accurate. There are photos of the debris all over there. I'm going to, on the next commercial break, put up my Pod People article on this. Okay, and again, there was debris all over the ground. Some of the debris punched all the way through into the inner rings. But again, if you want an accurate simulation of what happens when a 757 hits the recently reinforced wall of the Pentagon, then you take a glass Christmas tree ornament and you hurl it against a brick wall. And that's going to be a much more accurate simulation of what happened. And basically, it slammed through the wall into the ground floors, and the upper floors collapsed. If you pan out on the pictures, you will see where the building slants down to the left and to the right. So, again, they're out there trying to put out this nonsense about no plane at the Pentagon, holograms at the World Trade Towers, micro-nukes at the Trade Towers, no evidence of thermite. They used a micro-nuke. And again, as I pointed out, the very smallest nuclear weapon that can be built because of the requirement of having a minimum amount of fissionable mass is 20 tons of TNT. An explosion of that size would have blasted out the walls of the World Trade Towers, and it would have been very obvious it was an explosion. And don't forget all the photos we have showing demolition the scars of demolition charges on those load-bearing members. But again, the propagandists are trying to keep everybody confused, and that's why they're putting out all this nonsense. Apollo moon landings were faked. Chemtrails, Elvis is in a UFO, the Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster's love child. And they're trying to make serious discussions of recent events look like the front page of the Midnight Sun. And we have to stand firm on that and just say common sense and know enough about science to know when you are being fed a line of bovine excrement. Now, I did find this video by Barbara Specter, Jewish Lead Destruction of Europe in Multicultural Push. And I'm going to go ahead and put it up so that you can all take a look at what that is saying. All right, getting on back to the news. Now, President Trump is changing the face of American immigration in terms of the refugee policy, and he has cut by more than half the 110,000 refugee target the Obama administration had bequeathed him, and dramatically shifting the demographics of who is being let in. He's letting in more Christians than Muslims. And I think that's going to do a lot to reduce some of the tensions and culture shock that we're seeing from all of this. Now, over in Spain, Madrid is getting ready to deploy police to prevent the Catalan independence vote. They're literally going to send the police into Catalan and station them outside the polling places to just not let people go in and vote. And I think Madrid needs to understand how this is going to look to the rest of the world. And we understand what's going on. The globalist dream is in serious, serious trouble right now. Because instead of all these countries wanting to join these unions, the European Union, the North American Union, whatever, all of a sudden, regions are starting to break off and want to become their own countries. Like Catalan, for example, or Kurdistan, or Crimea. And that's exactly the opposite of what the globalists want. And so the globalists are out there saying, we've got to protect territorial integrity, we've got to bring them all together. One planet, one throne, one private central bank. Taking it even further, Spain is now blocking the domain name system to silence Catalan independence vote websites. Spain has gone into all the DNS servers and simply deleted all the records for the Catalan independence voting sites. The websites, if you type it in, says DNS record cannot be found. Now, if they've configured their servers correctly, you should be able to still reach them with the IP address if you manage to save that. Unfortunately, with virtual domains, where you have several domains on a single server, that won't work. Now, Trump is already out there saying that the Catalan secession is foolish. And this is despite long-standing assurances from the State Department that the U.S. would not take a stand on the upcoming referendum, which is this Sunday. But apparently, President Motormouth couldn't help himself while hosting Spain's Prime Minister, loudly endorsing Spanish unity. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome to the show. Seem to have a lot of noise on the line today. So getting over to Great Britain, there is still a lot of tug-of-war back and forth over what Brexit is, when it's going to happen, what it's going to cost, whether it's going to happen. The Remainers are still out there trying to find some way to basically overturn the will of the British people, because these matters are too important to leave to the voters to decide. So, story coming out of the Express, David Attenborough is attacking the EU referendum, saying Brexit was an abrogation of democracy, and saying that the people didn't understand the arguments for remaining in the European Union. Well, I think all they needed to understand were the reasons for leaving. The heavy cost of Brussels on the British taxpayer and those open borders flooding all these refugees into Great Britain. And David Attenborough, and yes, he's a very intelligent man, but you're not going to make any point saying you all voted the wrong way because you were stupid. You're not going to get a response. Hillary actually tried that last year. Meanwhile, Arch-Federalist member of the European Parliament, Guy Verhofstadt, is saying that the United Kingdom has to take financial responsibility over Brexit and pay a divorce bill to Brussels. Now, none of this is actually in the European Union Charter. There is a provision for a member nation to leave. But there's nothing in there about how they have to pay a huge sum of money. And it is all about the money. Because when Great Britain is no longer part of the EU, the entire EU's economic weight is going to rest on Germany, and those people have already had enough. That last election demonstrated that. It's a growing trend. All right, let's grab a quick phone call. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I got to congratulate you on your patience with some of these people that phone in with this nonsense about these planes with 9/11. I'll try and make this very, very short. You know, this morning someone mentioned something about planes hitting the Pentagon and that, and then another person chimed in and said, no, it was a missile. And I said, you've seen, loose change. He said, yeah. And I said, well, have you ever been on a? And I'm talking to a 22-year-old, at this point. Have you ever been on a plane? No. Have you ever seen a plane? No. Do you know what a plane's made of? No. I said, it's aluminum. And as a matter of fact, I said, come here. And I took him into the shop, and I had a piece of aluminum, an inch by a half inch, about 2 feet long, and I hit it with a hammer, like on top of a vise. And I said, see that? See how easily that dented? Right? And then I grabbed a piece of hot-rolled steel, exactly what the girders would have been made of in these buildings, and I hit it. And it didn't dent. I said, what do you think happened to those planes when they hit all of that steel? Do you think, they broke the steel or shredded the steel or did any damage to the steel whatsoever? I said, maybe a little, but more than likely the plane was just shredded right up. So, and they're kind of like, there were two of them there, and they're kind of like, I said, you never figured on that, did you?
Yeah, we've got to encourage people to think.
People with no education.
Common Core, certainly in this country, doesn't teach kids to think. Anyway, we got to take a break for station identification. Al, stay on the line. I want to come back to you.
Okay.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Al in Canada. And some years ago, we had a neighbor who was involved in implementing Common Core here in Hawaii. And even though this person was not supposed to do this, they let me look at some of the guidelines to the curriculum. And it was very obvious that they were trying to teach basic math skills in a way that made math more difficult, not easier. And that the rest of the curriculum was all about teaching students to memorize and repeat, memorize and repeat, memorize and repeat. Nowhere in there was there any attention given to stimulating inquisitiveness or thinking or reasoning or logic. And that's why we have so many young people who just have been taught, listen and repeat. And they listen to the corporate media and they repeat what they're told by the corporate media and they don't think about it. And the first time you challenge them to think about it, you're usually going to get the same reaction that you were describing. Their eyebrows are going to go up and say, wow, you don't suppose we're being lied to? And you say, yes, of course. The people who are telling you that there was a missile at the Pentagon are the same people who told you Saddam had nuclear weapons. And by the way, that's a very good response. When you're dealing with somebody who has still drunk the U.S. government's Kool-Aid, just say the people who are telling you this are the same people who told you Saddam had nuclear weapons. And that usually will snap people out. It's kind of like the ice bucket challenge, only with words.
Yeah. Another response is, well, why would they do that? What? Why do you think someone would lie to someone else? They've obviously got something to hide. It just boggles my mind. I appreciate your time, Mike. I really do. And, this has been gone over for so long. And, there are some people out there that just refuse to accept the facts that you know what? That metal underneath where the planes hit just vaporized. You're exactly right. It just vaporized. It collapsed. It all just, turned to dust, and everything just fell to the ground. You're right.
Well, here's what's going on. Here's what's going on. There are people who don't want to look at the reality of what this government has become, because then they face that choice: are they going to do something about it or not? And they're too cowardly to face that choice, because they know in their heart of hearts they're going to say, no, I know the government is doing wrong. They're torturing people. They're lying to us. But I'm going to be the good little Nazi and not do anything about it. They don't want to admit that to themselves. So they will gratefully, desperately grab any propaganda that's thrown at them by the corporate media and say, this must be true. It has to be true. I believe it's true, because the alternative is simply too terrifying to face.
Yes. Mike, that's it exactly. You can see it in their eyes, Yes. You can just see it. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Thank you for waiting so patiently, Mark. What's on your mind?
Yeah, how you doing there, Mike?
I'm doing okay.
Mike, I just got a question for you about those planes. The plane that hit the Pentagon came in at, I don't even know if it was 100 feet off the ground when it supposedly hit. And the guy who did the flying, the supposed terrorist, if it was the guy, was a very inexperienced pilot, Hamzi, I think his name was, who had only training on like a one-engine plane before, like an Cessna.
Yes.
How was he able to do this? I mean, how was he?
Well,
we
don't know that he was actually at the controls. We've been told he was at the controls by the same people who told us Saddam had nuclear weapons. But witnesses who were close to the plane are saying that they saw the regular crew through the cockpit windows, and it looked like they were struggling with the controls, which lends credence to the theory that these planes actually had additional electronics added to them to place them under remote control. And you need to remember that Dov Zakheim, who was comptroller of the Pentagon at the time, his job before being appointed to the Pentagon was he ran a company that made remote control systems for aircraft.
So you think they could have done this?
Yes.
Think this is possible?
Yeah, it's obviously possible. They did it.
Okay, because I was thinking if you took a crew, for instance, let's say the CIA or even the Mossad, these people are not suicidal. There are a lot of bad things about either the Mossad or the CIA, but as far as I know, they're not suicidal. That they would actually go along with crashing it, but you do think it was remote control?
I think it could very easily. That's the most likely. Yeah, that's the most likely explanation because again, witnesses to the plane at the Pentagon say that they saw the actual crew with the shoulder boards, the epaulets, and everything, and it looked like they were fighting the controls. And I think the reason that Flight 93 had to be shot down over Pennsylvania was the crew regained control of the aircraft from whatever was controlling it. And because the facts on the airplane didn't match the narrative, it could not be allowed to land safely. So it was shot down, and they concocted this story of the passengers saying, let's roll, and we're going to deliberately crash the plane so it can't go on to New York and hurt other people, except that the wreckage of Flight 93 was scattered over 8 miles of countryside, which means it came apart at altitude.
Now, how about as far as the Trade Center themselves? You don't really still believe that the planes themselves caused the demise, right? You think there were explosives in the building at the same time, right?
There were cutter charges. We've got photos of the scars left by these demolition charges on the load-bearing members. And by the way, I just put that Pod People story up there as well. I mean, we ran all this stuff back on the last anniversary, September 11th. The information is definitely out there. And for me, the story that really makes it obvious something was going on was the behavior of the Secret Service with President Bush down at the Booker Elementary School in Sarasota, Florida. Because we have this video of Bush sitting there reading about pet goats, and White House aide Andy Card walks on in and whispers to Bush, and the official story is that's when Bush was told a second plane had hit the second tower, and everybody knew it was a terror attack. And Bush just goes on sitting there, and the Secret Service lets him do it. Now, here's the thing. Supposedly, nobody knows how many planes are flying over the country, crashing into buildings. Okay? And Bush's presence at that school had been in the media 3 days ahead of time, and there's an airport only 4 miles away. So who knew that it was safe to leave Bush sitting there in the school waiting to make his speech? Because normally, and especially if you go back and you look at how the Secret Service reacted when Reagan was shot, they don't even think. They grabbed. They would have grabbed Bush, shoved him in that armored limo, and started driving in a random direction to avoid a possible inbound. And by letting him sit there, they were making potential targets of all those kids and teachers who were around there with him. And if you go back, there's a famous Sherlock Holmes book called The Silver Blaze. And Sherlock Holmes identifies the criminal as the owner of the home where the crime took place, because in the middle of the night, the dog did not bark. And the only reason the dog would not bark was he knew he recognized the criminal. So what we have here is a Secret Service which to a man appears to have known for a fact that Bush was not a target that day, and that tells us they knew what the targets were ahead of time.
But do you think the Secret Service, they could have trusted the Secret Service enough, though? I'm talking about the government to give them that, to let them know that kind of information. I mean, because most of the Secret Service are playing civil servants. They're not really, they're not super spies.
Well, it's a
CIA.
very elite force. It's a very elite force, and of course you wouldn't have to tell everybody in the Secret Service the details. All you need to do is tell their commander, stand down, don't move, like they did for the police detail in Dallas, Dealey Plaza, in November 1963, where they told the police we don't need any additional protection.
Mm-hmm. So, because I don't consider them really a elite force. They're basically glorified guards. But that's besides the point. But the fact of the matter is, I still don't know whether they would trust that many. They would have. You would think they'd ask some questions. Look at a guy like Dan Bongino, who left the Secret Service because he couldn't stand working with Obama, right? And he's got his own talk show now. He ran for Congress a couple of times. You have somebody like that, and they could spill the beans. You really think they would trust these guys like that?
I think they would have had a vetting process in the months leading up to 9/11, because don't forget there was a lot of planning and work ahead of time. They would have simply very carefully screened the members of the security detail for those who would keep a secret. And I'm sure there was probably some kind of incentives for them to stay silent, such as a really comfortable retirement or not dying early.
Yeah, that's tough. Hey, I just got one other question for Mike. You mentioned something about Kurds, 250,000 Israeli Kurds.
Yes.
Are the Kurds aren't Jewish, are they? Or are they related to Jews?
Well, these are apparently Kurds who went to Israel and they became Jewish. They converted, and now Israel is planning on sending them back. See, Israel has a law. Israel has a law, the universal right of return. Anybody who is Jewish, regardless of their DNA, is allowed to be a citizen of Israel. That's where all the Ethiopian Jews came on up, and now Israel's trying to figure out a way they can send them back.
Yeah, but the Kurds never had that kind of, were never Jewish before, were they?
I'm sorry, one more time?
I'm saying the Kurds were never Jewish before, were they? I know there's some Christian Kurds, and there's some Yazidi, and I understand the Yazidis are actually members of the Kurds, but as far as I know, there's no Jewish Kurds.
I really am not sure, but apparently, according to Israel, there are Israelis of Kurdish ancestry who are Jewish.
Oh.
I mean, if you go enough generations, everything gets, confused. I have people out there on the net saying that I'm Jewish because my name Rivero is Sephardic. Well, there's Jewish ancestry in my family, but there's also French ancestry and English ancestry, and according to family tradition, there's even a Huron in the woodpile. So after so many generations, it just doesn't really make that much difference.
Were the Kurds actually maybe part of the Khazars or Khazar Empire, maybe?
I would have to research that, but according to the book, The 13th Tribe, no.
Okay.
Maybe we ought to take up a GoFundMe page and buy these, ancestry DNA tests for all these people.
Well, I've been trying to find out information whether there's some kind of a connection between the Saudis and certain parts of Judaism, mainly through the Talmud, which, I have no clue how to, the Talmud, to read the Talmud, but there seems to be a lot of odd, but whatever it is, I want to see if there's some kind of a connection between the Talmud and the Quran and the Hadith, all of which seem to have been written about the same time, because it seems very strange, that connection between the Israelis and the Saudis these days.
Well,
it seems like more than just a thing of a convenience.
Do you remember the Panama Papers scandal?
Now, what about them? Not sure what that was.
There was, it was basically this law firm in Panama that was acting as a tax shelter for a lot of big money around the world, and one of the revelations that came on out of there was that Benjamin Netanyahu's last campaign to be Prime Minister of Israel was heavily funded by the King of Saudi Arabia. So, there's some kind of relationship there, and it may not be religious, it may just be expediency, but that's what's going on. Anyway, listen, Mark, I need to let you go and move on here. We got a lot of phone calls, and we're running out of time. Joel in Wisconsin, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Boy, Mark was sure on a long time. Okay, Jim Fetzer and Mike Rivero have both done extensive research on 911, yet you've come up with different opinions. I would think that Mike Rivero, as smart as you are, would welcome the chance to take him on and debate him.
I did. I did. You know, Fetzer is being a little dishonest here. He invited me to debate him on InfoWars, and I said yes. Then that deal fell through, and Fetzer demanded to come on my show and debate me, and I said, no, I really don't want to go over the same thing all over again. My audience has already heard all of this stuff. And now he's throwing a tantrum, and he's running around making all these wild allegations that I'm hiding from him, and no, I didn't. I did agree to debate him on InfoWars. That was his original invitation. And I still have all the emails. Okay? So we're going to let you go here, and we're going to switch over here to Jeff in North Carolina. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about war because I think, I hate war just as much as anybody else, but I think on your show it's getting blown out of proportion to the part where it might become dangerous. And hear me out on this. I hear you almost every day say that the answer to the tyranny here is just to sit back and let the government collapse on themselves. And when you read the Constitution, they gave us a Second Amendment for a reason. And when I look around me and everything that's going on, we're having our rights taken. Mm-hmm. We're having our history removed. Mm-hmm. We're having, everything that America stands for. We're under attack. The tyranny is here. So I wanted to ask you, with that being said, and the founding forefathers gave us a solution to that, which I believe is the Second Amendment. So I wanted to ask you, since you say that so much, that in your opinion, when is the right to you? What has to happen before you would say, yes, we need to implement our Second Amendment right now?
Well, what would have to happen is one of two things. Either the U.S. government would have to lose most of its military capability, or the American people would have to greatly expand theirs. Because I'm talking about an issue of practicality here. There's one thing the U.S. government is really good at, and that's killing people. And they've spent vast amounts of our money to develop the machines to, if necessary, come into the streets of America and kill a bunch of Americans. And I'm not willing to go there because, frankly, I don't see the American people as being ready for a revolution in any event. And I know the first American Revolution...
But isn't that taking an assumption that the military would turn on the people and be on the side of the tyranny?
Well, we know that there's been a purge of the military high command to get rid of anybody who might be inclined to do that. That was going all the way back to George W. Bush. So at this point, I don't think... we know FEMA exists not to protect the American people from hurricanes, but to protect the government from the American people. And all they do all day long is they sit and they war game out these various scenarios. And at this point, they are far more prepared to deal with a revolt by the American people than we, the American people, are prepared to basically deal with a conflict with the government. I'm just trying to be practical here. I don't want to see a lot of blood in the streets. The wrong people always get killed and crippled on this. And again, I'm absolutely convinced that the U.S. federal government is on the exact same path the Soviet Union was just months before it collapsed.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I'm not condoning war or anything. I just think, I don't want us to go past the point where it's too late. And we should have implemented our rights that the founding fathers gave us before everything falls on us at once. Because I honestly believe that all this, the government trying to divide the nation the way they do is because they're giving us the answer. They don't want us to unite to become a force against them.
Well, that much is
true.
True.
We have the power when we're united. When we're divided, it's going to be easy, even if we did implement our Second Amendment rights, to come and throw the hammer down on us because we're so divided.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one.
I honestly think that's a big part of the division, and all this racism and all these lies and everything is divided up as much as they can so we can't be the force to take them down.
Well, it's not just to keep us... Can I finish here? You keep cutting me off here. Certainly keeping us divided is the agenda, whether they're concerned about us being a military opposing force or it's simply a matter of keeping us distracted from what the real agendas are to keep us from standing in opposition to the war agenda and so forth, is almost irrelevant. But you're right. They're using the divide and conquer tactics. They used them back in the 60s during COINTELPRO. But again, I cannot condone the idea of any kind of a violent uprising at this time. I think it would be a major mistake, and I think it would actually make life worse in this country because it would justify the government's grabbing of more powers and suspension of more rights. Thank you for the call. We're going to let you go. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Let's get some news stories fit in here. This is supposed to be a news program here. Apparently, according to this article that we're seeing out of Patriot Rising, the population of illegal immigrants and their kids is now costing the American taxpayer $135 billion with a B dollars a year. And that is a pretty big chunk of change. And it's only going to get worse. All right, let's grab a couple of phone calls. Charlie in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, let's see. You were talking about the Falasha Jews. It was Mark Rich who rescued the Falasha Jews, and that's why Clinton pardoned them. It was Raphael Eaton from the Mossad that lobbied Clinton to pardon Rich. 9/11 now. I have to say, who do you think was the greatest pilot ever, Mike?
Well, I'm sort of biased toward Chuck Yeager.
Okay. It was Hani Hanjour, who power slided into a 180 over Pennsylvania, headed straight for the Pentagon, looking out his window with a guy bleeding to death with a cut throat.
We don't know. We don't know that. We don't know that. That's the official story. But that's told to us by the same. That's told to us by the same people who told us Saddam had nuclear weapons. And again, witnesses who were near that plane as it approached the Pentagon said they saw the regular uniformed flight crew through the cockpit windows, and they appeared to be struggling with the controls. Okay, so thank you for the phone call, Charlie.
So where do you stand on it, Mike? Where do you stand on it, Mike?
Where I stand on it is I'm looking at what the eyewitnesses are saying, and I'll give you another example. You have dozens and dozens of eyewitnesses who saw a passenger jet flying toward the Pentagon, and you didn't have any witnesses who saw a passenger jet flying away, and of course with the sound of an explosion, more people would be looking. So where did that plane go other than into the Pentagon?
Well, let's see. Who was that magician in Las Vegas who made the elephant disappear on stage?
Yeah, okay. All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Kathy. Kathy, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Kathy, are you there? Okay, I don't know why the... Kathy, are you there? Okay, we're having a problem with our phone system. All right, I'm going to go back to the news here then. Everybody is still talking about this last election in Germany. And there's a rather interesting story that came on out in Sputnik News saying that Merkel's position is shaky. Yes, she held on to the chancellorship by a very slim margin, but she is seriously weakened, along with all three of Germany's top parties. They all lost ground. And Sputnik goes on to say that the rise of the Alternative for Germany party is a return to European norms, because that's what AfD campaigned on, going back to the German culture, and keeping Germany, Germany. And that's what the German voters wanted. And I think they're going to do even better in the next elections than they did now, especially if they keep an eye out for election fraud, because as it turns out, they have discovered evidence of voter fraud in the German election. There are several districts in which the AfD party got 0% of the vote, while the neighboring districts had 18 and 24% respectively for AfD. And even the German government is saying, wow, that's really kind of strange. I wonder how that could happen. But the German vote has shown that European federalism has failed. And Yanis Varoufakis is saying we are now seeing the beginning of the end of the European Union. It is going to be heading for collapse. And it may even be sooner than that. A lot of hostilities, a lot of tension. Macron is threatening to launch a breakaway European Union group dedicated to the refoundation of Europe. So it's already beginning to fragment politically. Now, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about what's going on in Europe, and I'm sure that George Soros is breathing a bit of a sigh of relief that Angela Merkel is going to be chancellor and is still going to keep the open borders policy going. But the crisis is not over, because over in Austria, they have a young rising political star. He's 31 years old, Sebastian Kurz. And he looks like he is on course to win election. And he is very much opposed to the open borders, wants to keep Austria. And that's why he's getting huge amounts of support. There's this pushback against the open borders. All right, let's grab a phone call. I guess we have Kathy in New Jersey. Kathy, are you there? Aloha, Kathy. Welcome to our show. Are you there? Okay, we're still having a problem in our control room. Let's try Mike in Los Angeles. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mike in Los Angeles, are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing? I just wanted to talk about what that previous caller mentioned about Barbara Leonard Spectra.
Yep.
It's come to my it's become relevant that the Jews, most Jews, like these liberal Jewish groups and just Jews in general, are for open, like pushing open borders and stuff. And definitely there are some Jews involved in this Jew world order. You know, like the New York Times. Most of the people in the New York Times are Jews, as well as NBC and CNN. Like, the Jews are a problem to this, and
well, you know,
I don't know what we can do.
I have to be very, very concerned. I hate using a generalization like Jews, because it includes Jews who are assimilated into our society and they're a benefit to our society, and I don't want to tarnish them by saying Jews do this and Jews do that. It's as unfair as saying, you know, blacks are all thieves and Mexicans are all lazy, and we know that's not true. It may be true for some individuals. So please direct your criticisms at the individuals. You can talk about the people. Okay, at the New York Times, you can talk about the Israeli government, and you can talk about the Israeli government supporters in this country, or the globalist supporters in this country. And yes, it's okay to mention that a large number of them are Jewish, many are not. But I don't want you to get into the habit of just painting with this incredibly broad brush that includes people who have done absolutely nothing wrong to this country.
I want to respond to that, Mike. I agree with you on some aspects of that. Definitely Israel, like the whole AIPAC, is a big problem. You know, They have a lot of influence over American government. But Jews in general have a hive-like mentality. They keep to themselves. They don't marry outside their race. And the Jews I've been around with are very racist. And, you know,
that was my experience as well. That was my experience as well. Can I comment in here?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, you've got one thing wrong. It is a very big deal when a male marries outside the race. That's they tear the clothes and they get really upset. It's considered okay for a woman to marry outside the Jewish faith, because then she's seen as bringing a newcomer in, and that was the case in my first marriage. Okay, so again, let's try and be accurate before we say something about people that is not true, that is going to cause some hostility. Okay, I feel you're being a little reckless with your comments here.
Mike, okay, don't you think that every Jew has dual citizenship. At least every American Jew, every Jew has an Israeli passport and American citizenship, right?
I don't know that for a fact. Okay, I know that Jews in America can get an Israeli passport, but that's a far cry from saying that everyone has one. There's a paperwork process they have to go through. You know, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let you go here because your recklessness with what you're saying is really beginning to bother me, and thank you for the phone call. We're going to get back to the news here. We have to be very accurate about our criticisms here, or we're going to have all kinds of people saying, oh, there's just a bunch of anti-Semites over there at the What Really Happened radio show. So we have to be careful. And again, I don't like using the word Jews, like all Jews, and then make some kind of a character judgment. It's not fair to those people who aren't a problem. And like I said, I know there's a lot of Jews in Hollywood. I can't help but thinking of Renee Valente, who was honorable, decent, kind, supportive. She was my second mother, is really what it was. So, moving on here. As you know, we had last week a shooting at a Tennessee church, a mass shooting. And people noticed something very, very odd. Normally when there's a mass shooting, the gun grabbers are on full display. They're out there saying, oh, how much longer are we going to allow the scourge of guns to be in our society? We all need gun bans like they have up in Chicago, where they've only had 540 murders so far this year. But this story kind of went away. And the reason is very simple. It doesn't fit the narrative. Okay? It wasn't some white guy who was the shooter. It was a refugee from Sudan. And so the media is just dropping the story. It's just like they have in Germany, where they actually passed a law saying that when refugees commit a crime, you can't report that it was a refugee. You have to not report on it. So here we have, again, the corporate media is being dishonest. They're concealing information from you that you need to have to make good choices. Thomas Jefferson would be spinning in his grave at this, because he said it's the highest duty of every American citizen to keep themselves fully informed so that they can make good choices. And right now, the American corporate media is not fully informing you. They're feeding you only those bits of information and a lot of lies that will get you to come to a conclusion of your own free will that they have engineered. That's all mind control is. There are no rays, there are no pills, there's no zapping sounds in the background of the soundtrack. Controlling a mind is possible by just simply controlling what the mind knows. That's the purpose of the corporate media and propaganda. Now, a little bit of good news. Up in Oregon, a while back, there was an incident where there was an Antifa riot, and there was a gentleman, Damian Zachary Feller, who was caught on TV hurling a flare through the shattered window, picture window at Target, prompting employees to run with fire extinguishers. Then he threw a flare through the shattered window of a battered police SUV, and that was caught on a local TV station. They were airing live footage of this. He just got sentenced to 5 years in jail for torching that police car. And what's really amazing is a lot of these Antifa protesters, they're hired to be there. They're being paid to be there and cause a ruckus. And I'm hoping that this story will get a lot of traction and get on out there to send a message. Yeah, you're getting what, $25, $35 an hour, plus a box lunch to go on out and act like a jerk. Be aware that you could, in fact, go to jail for what you're being told to do. Over in California, more wildfires. Apparently, this is in Corona, California. They've got burning hillsides. It's really been terrible out there. And again, the problem is, as our economy tightens and more money is spent on war, funds to maintain those fire break roads just aren't there. And they're being allowed to be overgrown, and that's why the fires are able to run wild. There are no working fire breaks. So they've got this burning hillsides near the freeway as the canyon fire rages on. The fire has destroyed more than 1,700 acres of land near Chino Hills State Park, California. An emergency crews are trying to get people to evacuate all the homes and schools in the area. The canyon fire began close to Freeway 91 just after 1 p.m. on Monday, and it's now spread to over 2,000 acres, according to the Orange County Fire Authority. I hope somebody wasn't being reckless with a cigarette, because especially in some parts of Southern California, that dried brush, a spark will set it off, and it will go like crazy here. Following the hurricanes, following the fires, following the earthquakes, following the volcano, the FEMA director is now out there saying, well, guess what? The preppers aren't that crazy after all. FEMA's new director, Brock Long, has said that Americans need to develop a true culture of preparedness. All of a sudden, the preppers are fashionable. We're the trend. We're hip. And again, Puerto Rico, looking at the damage they've had, I'm sure even the people who prepped are going to be in trouble. I think only 41% have clean water to drink right now. And they're just desperate for aid efforts to get on in there as quickly as possible. But yes, you should be prepared to deal with off-the-grid living, a collapse of the supply chain, power, to take care of yourself and your family. And, you don't need to be manic about it. Unfortunately, Hollywood tends to portray preppers as, gun nuts with camo caps and boxes and boxes of ammunition. But that's not it. It's making sure that you've got ample amounts of your prescription medication, spare glasses, lots of water, water filtration purification, got to have that, storable food, batteries, generator, solar panels, a good radio, maybe even two-way radios if for any reason members of your family have to step out away from where you're going to, and have a plan. And the other more important thing is prepping is not just having a bunch of stuff and shoving it in the closet. It is a lifestyle. And that means every once in a while you take it out and you work with it. You train to know how to use it, how to use the radio, how to use the walkie-talkie, how to use the solar stuff. Make sure that you're familiar with it so that when you need it, you're not going to be fumbling around in the dark trying to find, a glow stick. Because everywhere you live, there's going to be something. Here in Hawaii, we get some earthquakes, we get tsunamis, we do get hurricanes, we've even occasionally gotten tornadoes. We may get an incoming North Korean nuke. That's weighing very heavily on a lot of people's minds. Southern California, earthquakes, wildfires. Up in the Pacific Northwest, the Cascadia fault system is starting to move. We had those big earthquakes and a volcano down in Mexico, another volcano getting ready to blow in Bali, another earthquake down in New Guinea, another one up in Japan. It does seem like the whole Pacific tectonic plate is moving around. But wherever you are, if you're in Oklahoma, you're going to get tornadoes. If you're up in the northern states, you could get blizzarded out. So, yeah, it makes sense to be a prepper and not make fun of the preppers. And I'm glad this new director of FEMA, Brock Long, is out there saying we do need a culture of preparedness. Because when something bad happens, if you have a significant part of your population who have prepped and who are able to take care of themselves, then the available first responder resources can concentrate more effectively on the others. We'd like everybody to be a prepper. We know that won't be true. But if we're taking care of our family, then the police and fire don't have to worry about us, and they can go worry about somebody else who really needs the attention. All right, let's talk a little bit about computers. Apple has already come out with the first update to iOS 11. Apparently, the initial release had problems with Microsoft Email, Outlook.com, and they rushed out a fix to take care of that. Still won't get the email badge to zero out on that one. Cisco is getting the axe ready for more job cuts at their headquarters, 310 staff. Apparently, they're not doing very well over there. They're going to lose 1,000 jobs worldwide, with 250 reductions earmarked for the headquarters in San Jose. Now, did you know the Awan brothers accessed the Congressional computer server 5,400 times without the required security clearance. Why isn't Robert Mueller looking into that? Or why isn't there a special counsel looking into that? Apparently, brevity is no longer the soul of wit. Twitter is now testing out a 280-character limit on tweets. So you can be more gratuitously verbose and multisyllabic. Unfortunately, this is not applying to the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean languages. Now let's talk about Facebook, because there's a very bizarre story going on over there where Consortium News ran this article where Facebook appeared to be pressured to finding something to implicate Russia. And the story was in the Washington Post that the first time Facebook was contacted, they said there was nothing there. Then political pressure was applied, and Facebook said nothing was there. And then more pressure was applied. Senator Warner flew to California and demanded the right results, and Facebook gave in. And in August, they presented 3,000 ads addressing social and political issues that ran in the United States between 2015 and 2017 and appear to have come from accounts associated with the Internet Research Agency, which is linked to Russia. But those ads leaked out. And it turns out the ads were about social issues, not the Trump-Hillary campaign. Very few of the ads addressed the presidential campaign, and they all supported Hillary Clinton. The rest of the ads were promoting African-American rights groups, Black Lives Matters. Other ads were saying these same groups pose a rising political threat. There's nothing there. And now the Washington Post is trying to back off and retract the claim that Facebook was pressured into providing this information. So it's all falling apart. The latest Russian collusion narrative, it's another nothing burger, this time with cheese. As that caller said earlier in the show, the nothing burgers are good for our diet. There's absolutely no nutritional value in there whatsoever. The U.S. is asking China to hold off on their new cybersecurity law that requires foreign companies to store user data in China and submit to security checks. And the U.S. is saying, please don't. It will damage our global trade, which sounds kind of weird when you look at how much hacking and everything the CIA and the NSA is doing. All right, we got to take a break. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take one more phone call. Ken in Fort Worth, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, howdy. Hey, October 5th is going to be Take Your Bible to School Day.
Okay.
You know, you say, well, hey, you take your Bible to school, you know, blah, blah, blah. And let the Jews take their Torah and what you call it, take their Quran. I don't care.
Well, I don't think that religious dogma ought to be taught in school unless it is a religious school, seminary or something. And anytime somebody says...
I agree with you. Okay. But they'll be teaching all kind of dogmas from everywhere. You know, it's understandable. You know, did you want that? I don't know.
Well, I don't know why they're doing that. I don't think it's appropriate to be teaching any religion in school, and certainly you can't cover them all. And any time that you teach one or two religions, you're discriminating against the others. But again, schools are for education in the basic skills of life, and if you want to talk about the invisible playmate in the sky, that's what churches are for. If you want to talk about the Force and Darth Vader, that's what movie theaters are for. So everything in its particular place, and churches do get these tax breaks in order to function, and I think everybody ought to just stick to their own.
Okay, nice talking, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and close the phone lines. Right now, there is a new malaria bug spreading through Southeast Asia. Was first discovered in Cambodia. And, of course, like all malarias, it's spread by mosquitoes. It's going through Southeast Asia, and the problem is this new form of malaria is drug resistant, making the first line of defense against it null and void. I'm wondering if quinine would actually still work. So basically, countries in Southeast Asia have reported artemisinin-resistant malaria. This is Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar. And what's more concerning is that along the border between Cambodia and Thailand, the parasite has become resistant to almost all treatments. Now, when antibiotics first came along, everybody said they're the wonder drugs, we can cure illnesses, and they forgot about the fact that there is still something out there called evolution. And that is that these antibiotics would kill off the vast majority of the pathogens, but a few would survive. And they would reproduce, and their offspring would have the same characteristics that allowed them to survive the antibiotics. And over time, you get a new population of microbes or viruses that do not respond to drug treatment. And a lot of doctors are saying the overuse of antibiotics has created this problem because there are all kinds of strains of drug-resistant illnesses that are out there. And they're trying to come up with more and more powerful antibiotics. And, of course, sooner or later, the microbes will, in fact, evolve to be resistant to that. So maybe it's time to go back and start looking at some of the ancient wisdoms and natural cures. Because we're on a dead-end treadmill as far as chemical-based pharmaceuticals. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stedman's program. I understand he's got interesting stuff to share with you. Please take what you heard here and read on the website. Share it with everyone that you know. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Aloha, America.